Hello and welcome to Agency Office Hours for January 2024. I'm Karl Sakas. We have an unusual format today due to some weather-related technical difficulties, but that is the nature of agency life. I've invited my colleague Diane Stadlin to join. Diane, hello. Thanks for joining today.
Happy to be here.
Diane will share some insights based on her decades of experience in agencies, including as an agency president and COO. But first, let me give you a preview of the questions that we'll be covering today. All right. Andrea in Atlanta has a question about dealing with scope creep. Liz in New York has a question about getting paid for all of that work that tends to come up during the sales proposal process. I'll share about some options for management training at 3 different scope levels, not all with Sakas and Company. Jeff in Jacksonville, Florida has a question about SOPs, standard operating procedures. And then Diane and I will discuss tips to help your agency around client retention and growth, especially as we start the year. Of course, if you're watching this video later, the tips will come in handy regardless of when you are watching this. All right. And if you'd like to ask a question in a future office hours, include that when you RSVP. You can see the link for that in wherever you are watching this video right now. All right. Our first up question today is from Andrea about dealing with scope creep. So here was the question. How do I reset a client relationship after scope creep has run wild? This is a common problem. If you're hearing this and you're like, oh, I have a scope creep problem too, it's not just you. I did a whole 3-part workshop last year related to dealing with scope creep, how to prevent it, stop it, deal with it as it comes up, things like that. So, not just you. Now, I was able to ask some follow-up questions of Andrea about her situation. This is a longtime client that wants more and more help. That's a good thing. The client wants more and more help. The challenge is that the client has wanted more than they're paying for, and it's time to have a conversation. One of the unique situations here is that Andrea's office is at the client's building, and so there's some extra twists to the situation. If your client also owns the building, check the lease. In the event that they try to kick you out, you probably want a plan B. But let's imagine this is a client that does not have access to your physical or virtual office. What to do? Well, one consideration is, are these scope creep problems happening across all of the clients or just one? In my work as an agency advisor, typically the worst offenders for agency clients, the end clients, are your longest term clients and often your largest clients. Now, those could be the same client, could be different clients, but when they're bigger, they tend to get used to hearing yes when when they ask for more help and you say yes. And when they've been a long-time client, they're probably paying less than your new clients. And that's not inherently a problem. It's reasonable to have a loyalty discount, but for instance, they shouldn't be paying half of what new clients are paying. You need to raise things along the way. Now, generally, if you've got a situation where a client has gone over budget and you need to pull things back, you want to have a conversation with them. And you can use my 3-step framework, reason, options, choose, to negotiate that conversation. How does that work? Well, reason, options, choose. You start by citing a reason why you need to change things or why you can't do the thing they want. Then you give them 2 or 3 handpicked options. Importantly, these are options that you have chosen, and you are okay if they pick any of them. There also may be an additional option that you may or may not state out loud, which is to do nothing, right? They don't want to pay the price you need. Well, that's fine, but you're not going to do the work, right? There's always the nothing option. And then finally, you let them choose. You let them decide which of these options are the right match for them. So, let's imagine you've got a client that's really gone over on scope and it's time to reel things in. You would have a conversation. Now, this works well to have it when it's renewal time. But if you've got a client that maybe is working on kind of an ad hoc basis, maybe there isn't a formal retainer kind of thing, you could have this conversation anytime. But, imagine something like this. You would say, hey, we enjoy working with you. As you've requested more and more help from us, and we're glad to provide that. However, the scope of the work that we're delivering for you is no longer aligned to the budget of the work. But good news, we've got some options. Now, stepping back, you have to decide, do you want to work with the client at all? If you don't want to work with them, then you need to fire them. You need to move on from working with them as a client in general. But let's say you're willing to work with them if the price is right. You could give them an option that is something like this. To continue delivering the scope that we've been providing, the new price would be this. Now, you could offer them a strategic discount. You might say, if you were a new client, the price would go from here to here, but, as a client loyalty discount, you would get a special price here. The key thing is that they can't keep going at their existing price for the scope they're getting. A second option might be looking at what is a narrower scope that they could get for their existing budget. So for instance, let's say maybe they're paying $10,000 a month for a retainer. The work has grown and grown, and maybe now, sometimes they're getting $30,000 a month. You could say, if you'd like to keep the current scope, the new price will be 30,000. Or, if you want, maybe the loyalty discount is 27,000 or something along those lines. You could say, client, if you'd like to keep the budget to the 10,000 you're paying now, here is the new scope that we could deliver under that price. You also might want to have an option that's somewhere in the middle, where maybe it's not necessarily the full scope of the full price or the smaller scope of the smaller price. I wouldn't calculate all of that out first. I would let them react to it first. You might say, and if you're looking for something in the middle, budget and scope wise, let me know and I can get back to you. Maybe let me know what your target is. And of course, there is always that unstated option beyond the 2 or 3 that you say out loud, which is if they don't like it, well, they can leave. You don't have to do it if they're not a match. Diane, I'm curious from your experience. I mean, you have dealt with tons of clients over the years, including some difficult clients. What would you add about dealing with scope creep for agency clients?
I think the biggest thing to be aware of is finding it quickly
Mhm.
and letting the client know if you can, stopping it before it happens to say something like, we're currently at 80%, 90% of your budget. The
Yes.
new changes you've requested will take us to this level. Can you approve an increase in the budget, or what we can offer this, as you just stated, with reasons, options, choose, and let them pick something. But the sooner that you say, we've hit the budget ceiling for this
Yeah.
month, this quarter, this year, the easier it's going to be for you to get yourself out of it. What you don't want to do is finish something up and then go begging hat in hand and say, all right, uh, we originally scoped this at this price. It's now double that. And
Yes.
that doesn't do anything for your credibility. And it doesn't help the client either, because they, if it's a good relationship, I mean, they do not want you to be working for free. By the
Mhm.
same token, if it's not in their budget, there's nothing they can do about it. So it really starts eroding the relationship.
That's a great point. And certainly finding it sooner than later so you can be proactive. I think in part that reinforces the importance of having, if you can, dedicated project managers at the agency. Someone who's managing, okay, well, here's where we are on budget. Well, where are we on scope? If you're at 50% of budget consumed and you're at 50% of scope, great. That should be fine. On the other hand, if you're at, 50% of budget, but you've only completed 10% of the scope, that's not good. And you want to sort that out sooner rather than later. And certainly working on time and materials doesn't fix all of that. We're talking primarily about milestone or deliverable based budgets. But, if you blow through their hours budget and have not accomplished anything you discuss getting done, they're not going to be happy with that either.
It also points to the importance of having some type of time frame based reconciliation on your side at the agency to
Yes.
get to those numbers that you just mentioned. So unfortunately, that means somebody has to be tracking that in order to be able to say, whoa, here's where we are in relationship to either the milestones or the hours and the budget.
I think there are a lot of things in agency life, and coming from an operations background, there's some things that might be the least fun, but that are the most
Mhm.
important. As
Definitely.
project manager at a time and materials agency, one of my responsibilities every Friday was to review all of the timesheets for the week and make sure that things were, if it was billable, that it was marked as billable. If someone hadn't rounded up to the next quarter hour, which was our policy, I would do that, things like that. Making sure that things were getting tracked. Also, I could see were people hitting their billable targets for the week. People wouldn't get in trouble if they missed it necessarily. If they were on vacation, they're not going to hit their billable target, for instance. Or, maybe I knew that they were working on a client where the client had paused things suddenly and we didn't have enough time to adjust. Okay, that's fine. I could also look for clients that are within the client work, team members who were billing way more than the target, right? That meant they were probably overworked and I needed to get additional help in there. Yeah.
The
So,
converse of that is if you happen to finish something sooner than you thought or with less budget,
mm,
rather than saying, hey, we saved you this, here you go, you have the opportunity then to do an upsell
yes.
to utilize the remainder of the budget for maybe something that the client has talked about wanting to do but didn't have budget for,
And
or another proposal that you'd like to share to see if the client will let the agency start work on it.
great point. And that fits into generally, we talk about it's okay if something is strategically free or strategically discounted, right? It's free or discounted for the agency's purposes, but ideally never secretly free or secretly discounted. Let the client know they're getting something extra. So, Dan, thank you for sharing on that. One other consideration if you've got a high scope creep client before we move over to the second question about getting paid for sales related activities is, if it's a client where you have a client concentration problem, which I define as more than 20% of your revenue from a single client, you have to be careful, right? If you're going to push back on scope creep, they may choose to fire you. I saw a conversation recently where the end client of the agency was past due, and the agency raised, did they need to pause new work? And the client actually had the gall to say, if you pause things, we may need to move to fire you completely at the agency. The problem in that particular case, as I observed, was if the agency keeps working, the client may get even more past due. The fact that the client is past due is separate from the future work. Yes, there is some leverage and all, but separate things rather than focusing on what the client might be trying to get you to focus on. So be careful. All right, next up, we have a question from Liz in New York related to sales proposals. So to paraphrase, here is the question. When it comes to agency sales proposals, you have to do a lot of work. Sometimes a little work, sometimes a lot of work, but ultimately you don't know if you're going to get paid or not. So what can you do to get paid for that scoping work, that sales proposal work, or at least not spend so much unpaid time? Well, there are a lot of considerations here. Start by being picky about your proposals. Just because a client asks you to do a proposal does not mean they get a proposal. My view is that you should not create a formal proposal for a client until they've confirmed that they are qualified. Whether you're using BANT, budget, authority, need, and timing, or my crux technique, where X is X factor, do they things feel right with them? Things like that. Uh, Don't do a proposal until it's clear that they have the budget, they have the authority to hire you, they actually need the help, and then the timing is right. You run into situations where you do a proposal and you don't hear from them for months. All the more important reason to include an expiration date in the proposal. I like if I rarely do formal proposals, but when I do, I'll put in usually a 1 month expiration date, which is, I'm glad to regroup if they need longer, that's fine, but cannot guarantee the price. That helps create some incentive for your clients to make a decision. Or if you need to charge more, like someone shows up 3 years later, you can help explain that the prices have gone up. So be picky about the proposals. I would recommend for your agency, do not create a proposal until the client has confirmed that they have allocated a budget, and ideally they have told you what the budget is. Now, it's okay if someone reaches out to you and they say whether they say it directly or just convey it indirectly, that they're shopping around, they're trying to understand how much it would cost. I've been there as a buyer. If I'm buying something for the first time and I have no idea what it should cost, I'll go online and try to get an idea of what the range is and what is normal. What would be cheap? What would be expensive? What would be so cheap that I'd wonder about the quality? And what would be so expensive that unless there's some really good reason, I would set that aside, kind of the outliers. But, if someone is just shopping around and like, how much is a website? How much is a marketing campaign? How much is a video? They need to answer some additional questions, but you could give them a range. For instance, I had a client focused on custom software development in Colorado, and they were getting these time waster questions. And, like, what do you do? And my advice, they could do initial custom apps for $50,000 or up to $250,000. Sometimes it ended up being more than that for future phases. And I said, that's what you tell them. Someone reaches out, say, hey, we'd love to help. When we've helped clients do this type of thing before, it's typically between $50,000 and $250,000. And then bite your tongue, stop talking, and let the client react. Sometimes you'll hear things like, oh, 50 to 250. I was hoping you could do something for like $10,000. If they're looking for a custom app for $10,000, they should talk to a freelancer who, even then, that's probably not enough. But okay. Or they might say, 50 to 100, that's what we were hoping for, like preferably lower. We could go up to 100. Like, can you help us for that? I mean, sure, if that's in your range, the odds are they're not going to say, oh, we were going to spend $4 million, but okay, sure, give us all of that for 250,000. Like you're still going to have some discussion about things, but give them a range. Do not give them a formal proposal. This also can come up if you're feeling overwhelmed about having all of these proposals to ship. I had a client several years ago where he was pretty stressed. We're doing one of our monthly coaching calls, and he had 5 proposals to ship that week. We were speaking earlier in the week, and he had made commitments to ship 5. And I said, well, let's take a look at those 5 proposals or the 5 opportunities. I said, because I don't think you're going to want to do all of them. You don't have an equal odds of winning each one. There may be some that don't make sense. And so we took a look at it. One of them gave preference to an agency in a particular geographical area, which his agency was not in. So he probably wasn't going to get that in the first place. I set that aside. There's another where he wasn't a good fit at his agency. He set that aside too. So that left 3 out of the 5. And I already cut his workload, by 40%. And we honed in out of the 3, 2 were a pretty strong match that he had an above average chance of winning those. And then the third one, maybe. So my advice to him was focus on those 2, maybe not sure thing, but close to sure thing kind of proposals. And if he had time, do the third one that was kind of so-so. and bow out on the other two. And you can always change your mind. You can say, on reflection, we're not the right match for this. So we're going to withdraw. I have some other tips, but before I share those, Diane, what would you add about dealing with time-consuming sales proposals?
I totally agree that you need to try and nail down some budget parameters before you get started, because the last thing that you want in a proposal is to lay out all the wonderful things you can do and then find out that you can do maybe 10% of that. The
Yes,
client's not going to be happy because you've shown him all the shiny objects and yes, I want that,
right.
but it's way beyond what they can afford. So trying to be realistic, and that's often a tough conversation to have, but you need to explain it that I want to make sure that I provide you with the best description and framework of the type of work that we could provide
Mhm.
within the budget that you have allocated. It'll
Yeah.
asking that question will
Making
also
it about
help
that,
clarify.
right? Yeah,
It'll help clarify who, if that person has signing authority on
right.
the budget, or if there are other players that haven't been disclosed. Is it really procurement who said, okay, I need you to get 3 bids on this, not proposals, I need 3 bids.
Yeah,
And the client has framed it that I want you to give me a proposal, which that's slightly different language in a different situation.
yeah,
If you're bidding on something, are you going to have the same viewpoint of it if you're doing a proposal for someone who is giving you a lot of background information and
right.
rich insight into what they're
Yeah.
looking for? You might treat it slightly differently.
And in general, my view, and I've written an article about this, I believe you should not do an RFP unless you have some sort of an unfair advantage. Now, not unfair to the point of, being illegal or unethical, but for instance, if the client is willing to answer questions as you're doing the proposal, that's important. If they won't talk at all, not as good. If it's someone you've worked with in a previous job and you know them and you like them and they're good to work with, okay, that's helpful versus, a situation where you're just sending things off into the void. One other consideration is to consider some sort of an initial engagement where maybe they want you to do all of this work before they agree to pay a bigger budget. You could do some sort of a paid discovery, where you're doing initial analysis or initial recommendations or something. It'll be unique to you. You can look for the link for this in the video description, article on paid discovery. Diane, we created a version of that recently or last year, our phase 1 service. What we found was that if someone wanted help wanted advice from Sakas and Company, they could either commit to a sizable project over several months at a sizable budget, or they could do a one-off bite-sized call where, we're talking for about an hour. I do a bit of review and then dive in, but there wasn't anything in the middle. And so what we came up with was what we're calling the phase 1, where it's like a phase 1 of a larger engagement. I do analysis, it's custom to each client. We're, amidst that process, gathering information about team and clients and goals and time and strategy and so on. And then I'll make recommendations, quick wins, validation on existing plans, including tips to get better results and also focused on some longer term priority advice as well. Also share perspective, right? Because it's hard to know what other agencies are doing, kind of thing. And thinking, Diane, we've seen a positive response to that. With that in mind, any other tips for agencies on proposals before we move to the next segment?
Be careful what you put out there because you're going to have to live with it if you're accepted.
Yes,
Unless, don't do a loss leader unless you know you can handle it. I've been in situations where it has been, all right, we need to fill up a bunch of hours. How are we going to do it? So you might do a strategically free
Mhm.
situation and let the client know that, all right, I'm giving you this special one-time price, but
Yeah,
then you have to really be careful to make sure that you keep reinforcing that.
yeah.
And then on like the invoice, put it right on there that this would be the normal price. This is the special one-time discount. So
Yeah.
the client clearly sees that if they want a repeat of this level of work, they're not going to get this same price. So it's make sure you know what you're promising
Uh,
and that you can live with it.
that's a great point. Make sure that it is strategically free or discounted, not secretly free or discounted.
Correct.
Cool. Thank you. Uh, well, Diane will be back again shortly, but first, let's take a look. Um, or coming up, we'll take a look at standard operating procedures, and then Diane and I will have a discussion about building client relationships and growing client accounts, especially as we, at the start of the year. But first, uh, I'll often get questions from people about management training. They've got a high potential team member. What can they do to get them developed as a manager? Last week there was a Wall Street Journal article about how with the pandemic, a lot of companies cut back due to supply chain issues, which, makes sense. But a lot of companies, bigger companies, have kept those cutbacks. For instance, Coca-Cola has half as many beverage options now as before the pandemic. So, you don't have as many options. But fortunately, when it comes to leadership and management training, you have some really good options. If you're looking for very introductory management training, I recommend the Manager Tools Effective Manager Training. At the moment, if you do the virtual program, 8 hours over several days, they charge $1,100 for that. If you're looking to do that in person, they offer that in different locations. It's a bit more. But the virtual option's good. My colleague Kate did that virtually. I did their in person several years ago. That's a good introduction to managing people. Talks about one-on-one meetings, feedback, coaching, and so on, and delegation. Now, if you're looking for something really in-depth, you could do something like the Grinnell Leadership Jumpstart. I did that program a bit over a decade ago. Got some life-changing 360 feedback. My colleague Kate did that more recently, but that's a commitment, right? You're spending a full week, and it's a whole process in person. What about something in between? Well, in that case, you might be interested in my agency leadership intensive. It's an 8-week fully virtual program, 2 hours a week meeting live, plus some additional time for homework. And you'll come out with the 360 feedback. You'll create a custom plan, and you'll also build your network of fellow highly motivated fellow agency leaders, both owners and executives. If you're interested, there's current early bird pricing right now if you apply by January 31st, and then regular pricing if you're watching this a bit later. The application closes February 28th for the 2024 program in March and April. If you have any questions on that, reach out. We're glad to help. All right. Next up, we have a question from Jeff about standard operating procedures, or SOPs. Here's the question that Jeff asked. When it comes to agency SOPs, standard operating procedures, how much should we document? What is the right level of documentation? I spoke a bit with Jeff earlier to get a sense of where things are. And he shared a lot of the focus is around delivery documentation. There are about 10 delivery team members. And right now, a lot of people are, they know what they need to do. And if the agency isn't going to change in terms of headcount and the team lineup, you could be fine. But what happens when you add new team members? For instance, one of my clients toward the end of 2023, a lot of agencies were struggling, but the agency hired 15 new people to serve an upsell on one of their accounts. A lot of work to do. As you're bringing in new people, how do you get them up to speed? That's where, in part, the SOPs come in. Yes, you're going to have an employee onboarding process, but you're not going to necessarily walk through every single procedure during onboarding. You'll point them to where things are so they can dig further on their own. So, it's kind of like Goldilocks and the Three Bears, not too hot, not too cold, just right. You need to get the documentation just right. Ideally, it's tied into your project management system, or at least it appears there in certain ways. For instance, that you have say, a template for starting a new project or a new retainer client, and you can, hit a button, it pre-populates a project in the PM system, and then you can customize the details. You don't need to do that manually every single time. Even if you do custom work, you're likely not doing a totally custom process every single time. So you need to find the right level of detail, use your existing tools. If, a question I'll get is, what software should you use to organize the SOPs? The simplest solution is a series of Google Docs linking out to various other places. For instance, internally within Sakas and Company, we'll have documentation in Loom videos, recording, going through things, which I like in part because you can get an automated transcript, and you can watch it at faster than 1x speed to get the basic, the gist of things, and then you can slow it down to look at particulars. um, so that could be a good solution. You could use something more robust like Notion or other sort of wiki-based systems. There are specific training-oriented systems like Trainual, for instance. There are a lot of options. The main thing is that the documentation needs to match what people actually want and need. I would start by asking your team, what documentation do they wish they had? This can be a great thing when you hire a new team member. For instance, Diane, we hired a new team member, Irma, who noted that our existing documentation related to creating social media videos was not great. I mean, we had some documentation, but, it could be better. And she took the lead in building out a whole new documentation process, and it's amazing. Really glad to have had Irma's help on that. Diane, what would you add as agencies are thinking about SOPs, standard operating procedures?
There's a fine balance, I think, between, as Jeff asked, what's too much and what's not enough, and you have the Goldilocks. So
Yeah.
I'd say start with smaller pieces.
Okay.
What are the everyday things that have to be done that if you think about what you're doing and what might be delegated to someone else, or as
Mm,
you mentioned, building and adding new staff. So if you, as this level of person, are thinking, all right, we could improve our situation, we can optimize our team if we had someone who was just doing this at a different level. So you have to make sure that you have the right documentation in place so that
yeah.
that new person can come in and do it to the standards. Then you build
Mhm.
up the next level and the next level, and before you know
Yes.
it, you'll have the full A to Z complement, which you can use for onboarding. I think one of the worst things that happens during onboarding is someone joins and it's like, okay, what do I need to do first? And it's, oh, well, shadow so and so. And
Mm,
then that person who's supposed to be helping train doesn't have time to train.
right.
Where if there are videos like Loom or other tools and
Something
robust
asynchronous. Yeah.
there's a robust set of things they can pre-read or do homework on,
Yes.
then at least you're on the same page for the language and how you approach a project or how you approach different deliverables, and
Right.
and also do it client based. So do a primer on, if you're going to assign somebody to a new client,
Mhm.
give them some background and a little bit of bio on the
Yeah.
people they're going to be working with. And by all means, in your SOP, include like nothing gets client X angrier than if this happens,
Yes.
or client X likes this type of structure or this font or,
Hmm.
things like that. So it
Yes.
can be very powerful and take the heavy lifting off of people who are trying to train and give a gift to the people who are trying to help you because they don't have to ask you every question.
Everyone, for the most part, wants to do a good job, but if they're working in a broken system, it's hard to succeed. And don't do what happened at a previous job where I joined in day one. I was thrown on a call with one of our largest clients, and I got briefed, I don't know, like 5 minutes beforehand by our salesperson. I wasn't leading the meeting, and I'd been working with clients, since starting as a web designer and freelance consultant back in high school. So like I sort of knew, generally what to say or not or what have you, but I knew nothing about what the norms were because they just threw me in, you know.
Sounds familiar, Carl.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, if we think about firefighting, one of our potential guests for today wasn't able to join in the earlier planned live section because the fire alarm went off in the building and everyone had to evacuate. You never know what is going to happen. My. One other tip before we take a look at growing accounts, which is this. You need to sort out what are the topics to focus on. As we discussed, ask your team, that's important. But you could also look at two categories. What are things that are likely to come up? Something that you're doing, say, every month as part of client reporting, definitely want that documented. Even if you have things automated, you still need something about where to go in your automation systems to make it all happen and all. So things that are likely to happen, those are a good thing to document. The other thing would be around what are things that are not necessarily likely to happen, but if they did happen, they would be catastrophic. They would be huge. For instance, one of the things I put together for my clients, and I've shared that as an opt-in, is my agency layoff guide. It's a guide, it's 4 or 5 pages long right now, about what to deal with if you have to do layoffs. It's not great, but if that's what you need to keep the agency going, then you need to do it. But there are a lot of things that can go wrong along the way, and I've documented them in the guide, or many of the things to consider so you can get better results. Now, you may not fully document all of that, but you might, for instance, anytime someone leaves, make sure you document what needs to be in the separation packet. Info about Cobra or other insurance continuation, for instance. Info about how to roll over the retirement plan account. Info about perhaps a reminder about the non-disclosure agreement that they signed. Maybe share a copy with them as a reminder. And things like that. You want all of that information handy. Also, probably a checklist, for instance, say they're working remotely, getting their computer back. And what is the process to, say, ship them a box and a label to get the computer back so you're not wondering, what's going on, kind of thing. So if it is going to happen a lot, you want to document it. If it's happening infrequently, but it's potentially very expensive or even catastrophic, or there are compliance issues or risks, you probably want to document that too. All right. Final segment for today. We're focused on client growth. And Diane and I will be chatting about this. So, here's the question that we're going to look at. When it comes to client growth, what should agencies be looking at the beginning of the year to boost client renewals and upsells? So, Diane, every agency is unique in terms of where they are, but a lot of agencies have renewals where clients start a new contract January 1st. Now, it's after January 1st right now, and if you're watching this video later, it'll be, even further later. But, ultimately, this is a good opportunity to plan ahead. For instance, make your client the hero, prepare an end of year summary for the client. Here's everything we've accomplished this year and things like that. And you know what? If you want to up level that even more, write that memo in the client, like your contact's point of view, so they could just ship it to their boss. This year, I or we accomplished this and this and this, and the goal was this, and we accomplished that, and so on. Because, clients will sometimes keep the agency a secret. You want to make them the hero. If you make them the hero, they're going to keep you around for the most part. Diane, what would you share about that end of year summary?
Something that is, a good idea to understand, you know, businesses go through changes in their operating procedures and their processes, sometimes on an ongoing basis, but sometimes it's only annually.
Yep.
So reaching out to ask things like, are there any changes on your side to when you need our billing, if you're billing on a monthly basis, or when you need contracts? Are we still on a calendar versus a fiscal year? Have there been any changes to your accounting system or any other interfaces we need to be aware of? I mean, are there new people that you
Right.
have to contact? And then get a check in about, okay, who's on your team?
Yes.
And then do you have any big meetings scheduled yet for the year so that you make a note of them? If you know that, okay, starting in 2024 or whatever year,
Hmm.
we're going to be having end of month meetings with our up level managers. And I'm going to have A, B, C, D to
Yes.
present. Well, as the agency, start compiling that. Don't wait till 2 days before the client's going into that meeting.
Yep.
Start pulling your reports, make a template, or talk to the client to see, okay, what could we provide you with that will make that easier for you to deliver to your manager? You just said make the client the hero. Well, make their life easier
Yes.
and look towards what you're going to do at the end of next year. Make sure you've got something in place to, reach out and say, thank you for your business,
Hmm.
whatever form that takes, because we know that, not all clients can accept any kind of a gift or whatever, but, sometimes a handwritten note or card is even more important than
Yeah.
something else.
Love the
And
point about the card. I mean, because I think sometimes end clients, it varies, but sometimes may feel like, wow, the agency, they're doing this all day long, and I'm just doing my thing here and all. And so getting praise from the agency often can be a really positive thing.
also try and look forward. I mentioned meetings. It's like,
Mm.
what would you like to set up for our touch bases this year? If it's,
Yes.
an ongoing relationship, retainer type where you're doing the same work every month,
Yeah.
ask the client what kind of cadence of one-on-one meetings they would like. You're
Yes.
going to be doing your updates and delivering,
Right.
monthly results or whatever requirements are, but okay, when can you have an actual conversation face to face so that you make that relationship as sticky as you can possibly make it? So get those on the books at the
Yep.
beginning of the year. If it's quarterly, if it's monthly, if it's
Mhm.
twice a year, talk about planning for next year. So back up that calendar to say, all right, when do you need to be setting and submitting budgets, either again, quarterly or for next year,
Right.
so that we, the agency, can help you with whatever you need to make sure that your budget request is going to cover the work that you
Yes.
want to do. And then start tracking different projects that the client might mention. So keep listening, because clients are great when you're having those one-on-one conversations with the, gee, I wish I could just.
Yes.
So if you start don't make a big deal out of it maybe at that time, but start compiling it. And then you have the opportunity to go back and say, all right, we've had X number of conversations, and I've heard you talk about this, this, and this.
Right.
These are great initiatives, and here's what it would entail for us to help you execute some of those. Or I found a great partner. We don't do that work, but I found a great partner to help you accomplish this. Is that something you'd like to explore? So you're listening for that opportunity to expand and extend the service that you're providing.
And ultimately positioning the agency as a, as they say, trusted advisor rather than
Exactly.
an implementer or what have you. And like thinking at one of the agencies where I was an employee, we had a client that saw us having the answer to every question they ever asked, whether we
Mhm.
actually knew about it or not. And you can get paid for that too. For instance, a client needs to recruit someone. They're going to hire in-house. That isn't solely an opportunity to lose revenue. You could charge them for recruiting help. That's an option. We also had a client where they needed to switch their needed to do a website redesign. We could do the redesign, but we normally would do the development, but in their case, they were on a different platform. And so we needed to refer that elsewhere. They paid us to help them find the other agency that to do the development. It was great. And so there are a lot of opportunities there, positioning yourself as the hero to the client. From my past work and all of my consulting, all of our work is with agencies. Through a marketing association, I co-founded and ran a CMO networking group. And CMOs are under a lot of pressure. The more you can position your agency as there as the helper to make the client the hero, the longer you'll stick around. And you know what? Say they leave, they bring you along to their new company. Make the client the hero. You are the helper. Uh,
Definitely.
Dan, I like the point also you mentioned about talking about you're getting into metrics. This is an opening to talk about KPIs. What are the key performance indicators? For instance, one of our clients just shared an update about their final set of 2024 goals. It's really helpful for me to know that because now I can
Mhm.
customize my advice around how are things going to work toward meeting those goals. And, also, are there any goals that are incompatible with each other? Are there, things like that? So the more you know about the client's goals, ideally their business goals, but their personal goals, if they're willing to share those too, the better. Um, Final thing, as we're kind of wrapping up this particular topic, Diane, I know you mentioned around the idea of client gifts or things like that. We start those early, and thanks in part, Diane, to you keeping an eye on that. This year the client gifts went out in October. I'm not a fan of sending client gifts, say in December, because that's when everyone else is doing it kind of thing. As you raised, Diane, there may be some gift limits in terms of the dollar value, or maybe if it's consumable, if they eat it or what have you, then the limits may not apply in the same way. Anything else you would add now as agencies are thinking about what will they do to be special for clients later in 2024?
I think it's about maintaining presence, listening, and and sharing insights and information.
Mm,
We've all said that CMOs are extremely busy. That cascades down the line.
yes.
Um, I always made it a point to subscribe to newsletters and join associations of the businesses in which my clients operated,
Yes.
and shared, if something came across in a newsletter or even in just, general news that was applicable to their business,
Yes.
and shared it in a way that I'm sure you saw this,
Mm,
or not that you're expecting that they would be watching for it
right.
or there was any issue that if they didn't see it, but thought you might like an additional copy of this,
Yeah.
or I saw this and then ask them a question about it so
Yeah.
that they have the opportunity to read whatever it is and then determine is that important for them in their business, or is it an insight about a competitor or about a change in a regulation or something that um, they might have missed because they're not able to look at everything. If nothing else, it shows that you care about what you're doing and that you're interested in learning about their products or services or business or the industry in general.
Yes.
And I had a few clients who, when they were asked to speak at various events, if they couldn't make it, was like, well, I'm sending you here
Mhm.
to be my representative, and you're going to be on this panel with all
Yeah.
the presidents of this company, all these competitors or in this industry.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, why would you have picked me?
Yeah.
But you're up on everything in the industry. You've shared all this information. When I ask you questions, you either know the answer or you know where to find it. So I'm confident that you'll be able to represent me and my company in good light. And then it would be, so just don't screw it up.
I think that the theme here is around being the thoughtful expert. Yes, be
Mhm.
the expert, have either the answers or like, collectively your team knows where to get the answers, but being thoughtful and thinking about the client as a person rather than just
Mhm.
a dollar sign or euro symbol or pound sterling or what have you. Clients want to know that you care about them.
And and
Good.
speaking of caring about them, there's something that you do that I know that not just clients, but other people appreciate and are surprised and shocked at, and that is you keep track of things that happen in their personal life. It's happy birthday, happy anniversary. Oh, this
Yes.
is it's X anniversary with your company.
Yep.
Or, if they've just had a child, keep kind of keeping track of that, but knowing those things again that humanize the relationship
Yes.
versus it's just based on dollars and cents, because it isn't. I mean,
No.
we're not necessarily in this business for the money. Yes, we are, but that's not all of
Really about
it.
the money, I think agency owners would work in investment banking or something like that, you know, and probably hate their lives. Though certainly if you're running an agency and you're not enjoying your agency life as much as you'd like, I mean, certainly that's what, Diane and I and the team focus on, helping you work less and earn more and just generally improving things. If you're currently not seeing all of the results you'd want, I'd love to help. It doesn't have to be that way. You're gonna have to make some changes, but it starts by reaching out. So you can go to sakeasacompany.com, go to the contact page, tell us more about what you're running into, and we're glad to help. All right. Well, Diane, thank you for sharing. Appreciate it. So that concludes our unusual version of agency office hours for January of 2024. Thank you to all of our guests who shared earlier about their questions. If you have a question you'd like me to answer for you, please include that when you RSVP for the event, or you can just join and listen in and hear what questions other people ask. Either way, we'll get this video up and good luck out there, and I hope to see you again at a future agency office hours. Thanks, everyone.